and look into this stuff. Last week I told you I was going to go over some more about Daniel and the study in Daniel and Revelation and stuff, and how I was going to just kind of pick it apart and show the individual kingdoms. And I don't know if I went into it too much last time, but there are different um, um, thoughts on what these dreams mean. And I think I alluded to it before, but there's old school and new school kind of a thing. I believe the Bible shows clearly what it intends to show, and we can get into what's going on in our modern day and time and kind of try to piece it in there. But um, a lot of the stuff we could get into at any given time, as history is changing and fluid, can change. And you know we might think we see something that is concrete now in our lives today, and then 50 years from now find out, if we're still here and God tarries, that wasn't exactly what really happened. So I just try to show through the Bible. The Bible shows what we need and what we need to, for our edification and learning as Christians, and even those who would be delving into this, or those of you that may not be. Um, so I don't want to beleaguer that point. Let's just go right into it. I said I would talk about it, so let's just read. The Daniel chapter 7 is where I wanted to start with the vision of the four beasts, and I'll just read it again. It says, in the first year, this is Daniel chapter 7, starting at verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. And it says, Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. So I kind of wanted to stop there for a second. The four winds of the heaven. If you look up the word of the heaven, it just means shamayim, which is basically like, the sky, the expanse, that we, the air we breathe, and the sky in that context. So the four winds of the sky basically strove upon the great sea. That is, if you look up that word, the sea, it means it's yom, and it basically means an actual sea. Now, what I wanted to get into there a little bit is, if you look at other scriptures, and if you'll just bear with me reading some and things of that nature, it says that in my study Bible, I think it's a great resource. I mentioned it a long time ago at the beginning of these videos. The Dakes, Dakes study Bible is a wonderful resource to use and utilize to study the Bible, because the man studied the Bible for over 50 years, and he uses the Bible to show you how to study the Bible. It's not necessarily so much personal commentary, which I think is good, because it's the Word of God. Show me in the Bible. Well, hopefully, we'll show you in the Bible where what we're studying today is, promoted by the Bible, and not really anything else. So we talked about winds in this passage, the four winds of heaven. I wanted to give you a couple of scriptures, and you can look these up. I'll just read them off to you. But even in Dakes, it says symbolic passages, winds in symbolic passages denote wars, strife, and judgments from God. He gives a lot of verses there, like for instance in this very chapter, verses 1 through 3, Daniel 8 7 through 13, Jeremiah 25 32 through 33, and Revelation 7 1 through 3. Now let's look at Revelation 7 1 through 3 real quick. I thought that one was kind of interesting, because if you go there, um, it shows. I'll read those to you. After these things, I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth. We just spoke about the four winds of the heaven or the sky that strove upon the great sea. Um, and it said in Revelation, these four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. So if what we're saying is that winds in these symbolic passages denote wars, strife, and judgments, then it stands to reason in chapter 7 of Revelation, when it's talking about the four winds of the earth, that they should not blow on the earth, means there should be a temporary reprieve of some sort of strife or judgment. And it goes on to say, further on in verse 3 in chapter 7 of Revelation, um, it's an angel that says, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of God in our foreheads. So that gives credence to the fact that the four winds denote judgments or strife or some sort of, uh, you know, wars or things going on the earth. And that if the winds are told not to blow on the earth, then there would be a temporary cessation of such things. So you can look into that, but I thought that was interesting. So let's move on back to Daniel chapter 7. The four winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. So if they're striving upon the sea, rushing upon the sea, that means that those potentially, if these four angels in heaven or whatever, in the spiritual realm, things happen, and then they happen in actuality on the earth. So let's say in the spiritual realm, these angelic beings over the four winds of heaven, or over judgment or strife, or allowing things to occur to enable God's plans for us and the world. For some reason, they are striving in Daniel chapter 7 upon the great sea. Now, I have my beliefs that the great sea here literally is a sea of the Mediterranean, because we know that you know most of the prophecies centering around Israel in the Bible is in that region of the world. When we read in, and I'll give you a reference later, where John wrote Revelation, he was on the island of Patmos, in the Aegean Sea, near Greece and all that kind of stuff. And so it has dual meaning sometimes, but also let's move on to that idea. It says it strove upon the great sea. So if in symbolic passages, the winds mean something, the seas mean something too, and they can represent peoples. So let's go to the verse 17 of this very chapter of Daniel, okay? And it says, well, let me continue reading before I go upon it. It says, "The four winds of heaven strove upon the great sea," Daniel 7, chapter 7, verse 2, "and the four great beasts came up from the sea, different one from another." So I wanted to finish verse 3. We're talking about four great beasts coming up out of the sea. Now, in this vision, it can, I gave you the scripture reference of an actual sea, meaning a sea. If you're having a dream, you guys know that you can see all kinds of imagery and things in your dreams. If this is a vision, this is a vision that is being explained, where beasts are coming out of the sea. Well, it could literally mean they're seeing like an ocean type thing where these beasts are coming out of. And it also can have that other meaning of meaning peoples in symbolic passages. So, in other words, I can see a beast or some sort of thing coming out of an ocean. I mean, I don't understand that in my dream or my vision at all, but I get clarification on it later. And so, I believe and don't have any reason to doubt that these four great beasts came up out of the sea, in a vision. But it also means, if you were to read in these scriptures, for instance, verse 17 in chapter 7, which we're reading, it says, "These great beasts, which are four, are um, four kings which shall arise out of the earth." So if they're coming out of the sea, these kings or kingdoms are arising. Okay. So in symbolic imagery, we're seeing a beast come out of an ocean, but it also means, for instance, if we study like Revelation 13, verse 1, let's go to Revelation 13, 1. And it says, "I stood upon the sand of the sea." Now, this is John speaking in Revelation. And again, he was on the island of Patmos. And it says he's upon the sand of the sea. So let's I believe that really is the Mediterranean where he was at that time. But it says he saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the names of blasphemy. So if we know that beasts are like kingdoms rising up out of the sea, again we have imagery of sand like on the seashore. You're seeing this terrible, descriptive vision of some beast with 7 heads and 10 horns coming out of the sea. But let's move on to chapter 17:1 to give you another example of what I'm speaking. This is Revelation 17:1. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials and talked with me, saying, Come hither, and I will show you the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters. Now we know the sea is a large body of water. And if we go on and study that in later verse in that chapter, verse 15 of the same chapter of Revelation 17, it says, And he said unto me, The waters which you saw, which we just read about, where the whore sits, they are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So what I'm trying to show you here is that in Daniel, you're seeing two things. You're seeing like the dream, the imagery, the vision, if you will, of something happening. And then you're getting extra information either given to us by God or the interpretation through angelic means or whatever to explain what's happening. So I read to you that 4 great beasts came from the sea, diverse one from another. Okay, it doesn't mean that he didn't see some sort of beast come out of the sea. John saw this other beast coming out of the sea. He was stepping on sand. So logic to me dictates he's seeing something like that. But then he's being told, what does it mean? If I saw some dragon coming out of the ocean and it had 7 heads and 10 horns, yeah, that's what I saw. But I don't know what that means. But God does, and God tells us when he wants us to know what things mean. So what I'm trying to get you to see here is Daniel said, I saw in my vision by night the 4 winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. So he's seeing the wind blowing upon the ocean, if you will. But it also means that there is some sort of goings on in the sea of humanity, if you will, upon the men and peoples and tongues and nations on the earth. Okay. And I think it further means, since we know that the Bible centers around Israel and, concerning them, and that is on the Mediterranean, and even John in Revelation was in the Mediterranean, that the sea that they're talking about here in the physical sense or in the vision sense, the body of water, is probably the Mediterranean or some big body of water. Okay. And these 4 great beasts, which we know, which I'll get into next, are also in the Bible. Beasts are symbolic passages representing kingdoms. Okay. And they come up out of this vision of of the sea, but they are actually kingdoms and tongues and people groups which represent the nations of those kingdoms that are going to arise. So I think that's pretty clear. Now I'll give a few scripture references for how they mean beasts. So if we go again to verse 17 of Daniel, it's explained that these 4 great beasts, it says, these great beasts which are 4 kings or kingdoms which shall arise out of the earth, the people groups of the earth. So that's what we're getting. You saw a vision of this strange stuff, but the beasts are going to be they're kingdoms. I'm telling you, that's what these things are. Okay, and that's what I hope to show today, how the beasts relate to kingdoms and antiquity, and also a future kingdoms under Antichrist, if you will. So for now, let's go on also to, let's say, the book of Revelation. Let's see what we can find there. Let's go to book of Revelation again. Sorry about me going through the pages of the Bible here. Just bear with me. Okay. Let's see if I can find one that shows that it's also representative of not only kingdoms but their rulers. Let's see. I'm trying to find one in chapter 13, 18. Now, this is speaking of the Antichrist, okay? And we were talking about beasts and how they represent kingdoms. And Daniel, they just explained that. These beasts are for kingdoms which shall arise. It could also mean individual uh, rulers of kingdoms. So I went to Revelation 13, verse 18, speaking of the future Antichrist, which we know, and I'll study with you guys later, gets power over kingdoms in the future. And it says, "Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast." Okay, we'll get into this later, but this is it says here, it is the number of a man, not a kingdom in this instance, and his number is 603 score and six. So that's what I wanted to show you first before we get into anything today. Daniel saw his vision. The four winds strove upon the great sea of humanity and its people groups. And because the four winds were allowed to do so, there's some sort of, goings on in the earth in the physical realm after the spiritual realm. The four great beasts come up from the sea. So he saw visions of the sea and these beasts coming out of the sea. But we were given further interpretation that they are kingdoms that are going to come. And it says diverse one from another. So let's move on in the book of Daniel, following on in chapter 7, verse 4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Now, I just wanted to go over that a little bit because I believe that the visions of Daniel chapter 2 and Nebuchadnezzar's dream are synonymous basically with the beasts of Daniel chapter 7. And I just want to go through each one. So we were told in the second chapter of Daniel that the kingdom under Nebuchadnezzar, which was the Babylonian kingdom, that Nebuchadnezzar was told, "You are the head of gold." And that image was the image of a man. It talks about all these kingdoms arising in succession. One would succeed from, come out of the other. So Babylon was succeeded by the Medes and the Persians, who then the Greeks took them over. Then Rome took over after them. And then there's this other kingdom that we'll talk about later. Well, it was told to Nebuchadnezzar, "You are this head of gold." And so the kingdoms of this world, as like we know, like the devil showed, Jesus, "Hey, I'll give you all these kingdoms. You just bow down and worship me." The world and man likes to put ourselves up, like gods. And we look at our empires, and you look at all the verses in the Bible where even Nebuchadnezzar said, "Look what I did. Look what I did. And look at what I built." And we know in a spiritual sense that Lucifer, or the fallen angel Lucifer, now Satan, he's the pseudo ruler of this world, the prince of this world. And when people are in league with him, they start acting like him and getting the God mentality. Look what I've done. Nebuchadnezzar was no different, as we'll see, but was told he was the head of gold. It was in this image of this man and these kingdoms of man, okay? So I kind of appreciated Dake's small comment there. He was basically saying, in chapter 2, you're getting images of kingdoms of the earth through man's eyes. This glittering, shiny metals, precious metals and things, or power and, of the iron and all this stuff. And it's a man's image. It's man without God trying to, rule the world, so to speak. And like Nebuchadnezzar, people are like, "Look what we do. Look at what we can do without God." But then when you get to chapter 7, and we're seeing these beasts who we are told are kingdoms and potential rulers of those kingdoms, like the Antichrist in Revelation. Well, God's the one giving the interpretation of these dreams and allowing, Daniel's vision of these things. And what does he see them as? What does he see these kingdoms as? He sees them as beasts. And he goes on to describe them, which we'll get into. Not as this glittering, wonderful thing, but as beasts, lions and leopards and bears and all these different things. So we'll get into that. But that's kind of what I wanted to say. Man has our take on our empires. We think we're so great. And God has another thought. Y'all are like a bunch of, you know, ravenous wild animals. You're not living the way you're supposed to be. And this is the way you run the world under your God, Satan, basically. We like to think our righteousness is so good. Look at what we can do. And God says our righteousness is like a filthy rag, right? We see ourselves as this glittering, beautiful, polished statue of gold and silver and whatnot, powerful. And God sees us as these ravenous beasts, devouring and doing horrible things on the earth. That makes sense to me. So that's kind of what I thought was interesting.